During decades, military archives kept this story in total secrecy. No soldier who participated wanted to talk about what really happened that night in Ramitelli, Italy. But today, you're going to discover why. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel for more daily documentaries. Ready? Now turn up the volume and let's begin. The telegram arrived at Allied Force Headquarters in London on December 26, 1943. Air Marshal Sir Arthur Tedder examined the paper with visible skepticism. The Americans were proposing to deploy their colored fighter pilots to support bombing missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. The British officer placed the telegram down on his polished desk and shook his head. "I have serious reservations about this proposal," he dictated to his aide. "The introduction of these pilots could jeopardize the entire strategic bombing campaign." What Sir Arthur could not possibly know was how profoundly wrong his assessment would prove to be. 6 months earlier, on a humid July morning in 1943, Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Davis stood on the airfield at Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama. The son of the first black general in the United States Army watched as 25 young men prepared their aircraft for another day of training. They were members of the 332nd Fighter Group, the first all-Negro aviation unit in American military history. Davis knew what awaited these men in Europe, not just the German Luftwaffe, but the prejudice of their own allies. First Lieutenant James Wiley from Detroit, Michigan, completed his pre-flight check of his Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. His hands moved with practiced precision over the controls. After 150 flight hours, the aircraft felt like an extension of his body. Wiley had graduated top of his class at Howard University in 1941 before volunteering for the Army Air Corps. Like many of the Tuskegee Airmen, as they would later be known, he had faced numerous obstacles before even reaching the cockpit. Military officials had initially claimed that Negroes lacked the intelligence, skill, and courage to fly combat aircraft. A government study, known as the 1925 Army War College Report, had concluded that the Negro was inherently unsuited for combat and leadership roles. Captain William Jefferson Campbell stood nearby, watching his men prepare for the day's exercises. Campbell had served as a liaison between the Tuskegee program and British Royal Air Force officials who had been invited to observe the training. The British officers watched from a distance, he would later write in his 1963 memoir, their expressions betraying their doubts. One RAF group captain remarked that he wouldn't trust his life to a colored pilot. Campbell didn't respond to the insult. He knew that words would never change their minds. Only actions could. In London, the War Office was facing pressure to accept American Negro pilots into joint operations. Prime Minister Winston Churchill had been briefed on the matter in November 1943. According to declassified minutes from that meeting, Churchill expressed neutrality on the subject, deferring to his military advisers. Those advisers, including Air Chief Marshal Charles Portal, were decidedly negative. A confidential memorandum circulated among senior RAF commanders stated, "Integration of American Negro pilots into RAF-supported missions presents significant operational and logistical challenges that may compromise combat effectiveness." Technical Sergeant Marcus Williams maintained the aircraft for the Tuskegee pilots. A skilled mechanic from Harlem, New York, Williams had been an automobile mechanic before the war. "Those planes never failed," recalled Captain Daniel Roberts in a 1967 interview. "Williams could hear a problem in an engine that no one else could detect. He saved more lives than anyone will ever know." Williams kept meticulous maintenance logs, which would later prove crucial in disputing claims that mechanical failures, not pilot error, were responsible for any losses the unit suffered. As 1943 drew to a close, the decision was made. Despite British reservations, the 332nd Fighter Group would deploy to Italy in early 1944. They would be based at Ramitelli Airfield, supporting bombing missions over Nazi-occupied territory. Colonel Davis addressed his men the night before their departure. According to multiple accounts, he said, "We are going overseas to fight two battles, one against Hitler and the Axis powers, another against prejudice and doubt. We will win both." The Red Tails, as they would come to be known for the distinctive crimson paint on their aircraft tails, arrived at Ramitelli in February 1944. They were assigned to the 15th Air Force with the primary mission of escorting bomber formations. British Wing Commander Harold Spencer was the liaison officer assigned to the group. His initial report to London, dated February 20th, 1944, reflected the prevailing skepticism. The Negro pilots demonstrate adequate technical proficiency in non-combat scenarios. However, their performance under actual combat conditions remains to be proven. I recommend limited deployment until combat worthiness can be established. On March 2nd, 1944, the Red Tails flew their first combat mission. They were assigned to escort a formation of B-24 Liberator bombers targeting a factory in Austria. The mission was considered low risk, a test of the new unit's capabilities. No enemy aircraft were encountered, and the bombers returned safely. Wing Commander Spencer's report noted, "Mission completed without incident. No opportunity to evaluate combat performance against enemy aircraft." What happened next would later be referred to as the incident at Munich. On March 24, 1944, the Red Tails were escorting bombers to a target near Munich when they encountered a formation of Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters. According to the official after-action report, Lieutenant James Wiley and 3 other pilots engaged the enemy while the rest of the squadron maintained bomber protection. In a 5-minute air battle, Wiley shot down 2 German aircraft, while his wingman, Lieutenant Samuel Jefferson, claimed another. Upon return to base, Wing Commander Spencer interviewed the bomber crews. Several reported that the Negro pilots had abandoned their escort positions to pursue enemy fighters. Spencer's report to London was damning. Negro pilots demonstrated lack of discipline and adherence to mission parameters. They abandoned bombers to pursue personal glory. This confirms our reservations about their suitability for critical escort duties. Colonel Davis immediately disputed this characterization. The squadron's combat logs showed that only 4 pilots engaged the enemy, while the remainder maintained their escort positions. Moreover, gun camera footage confirmed the 3 kills. No bombers were lost. Davis demanded a formal review of the incident. This request was initially denied. Help us take this story to more people. Like the video, comment if you already knew about this case, and subscribe to the channel. Now we return to the point where everything changed. April 7th, 1944 marked a turning point. The Red Tails were escorting bombers to a target in Romania when they encountered approximately 20 German fighters. What followed was recorded in multiple after-action reports, gun camera footage, and bomber crew testimonies. The Red Tails shot down 8 enemy aircraft without losing a single bomber. British Flight Lieutenant Edward Markham, flying as an observer that day, wrote in his report, "The performance of the American Negro pilots was extraordinary. They maintained perfect discipline while demonstrating superior tactical awareness. Previous reports questioning their abilities appear to have been premature and possibly prejudiced." The success of April 7th was not an anomaly. Throughout April and May of 1944, the Red Tails compiled an impressive record. Their rate of bomber losses while under their protection was significantly lower than the average across all escort groups. By June, even the most skeptical British officers were beginning to re-evaluate their position. Air Vice Marshal Arthur Cunningham, who had initially opposed the integration of Negro pilots into joint operations, wrote in a June 10th memorandum, "The colored American squadron has proven remarkably effective. Their bomber protection record speaks for itself. We would be remiss not to acknowledge their contribution to the bombing campaign. On July 12, 1944, an incident occurred that would later become legendary among both American and British air forces. A formation of B-17 flying fortresses was returning from a bombing run over Germany when they were intercepted by over 30 German fighters. The Red Tails, despite being outnumbered, engaged the enemy. Lieutenant Wiley, now promoted to captain, led his section directly into the German formation. In the ensuing battle, the Red Tails shot down 17 enemy aircraft. 3 Red Tail pilots were shot down, with 2 later confirmed killed in action. The bomber crews were effusive in their praise. A B-17 pilot, Captain William Richardson, later recounted, "We were dead men flying until those Red Tails showed up. They flew right into the teeth of the German formation. I'd never seen anything like it. Every man on my crew owes his life to those colored pilots." Wing Commander Spencer's report on the incident represented a complete reversal of his earlier position. The courage and skill demonstrated by the Negro pilots was exceptional by any standard. They engaged a numerically superior force without hesitation, saving dozens of bomber crew lives. I must acknowledge that my previous assessment of their capabilities was profoundly mistaken. By autumn 1944, the reputation of the Red Tails had spread throughout both American and British air forces. Bomber crews specifically requested them as escorts. A declassified strategic analysis from RAF Bomber Command, dated September 1944, stated, "The 332nd Fighter Group has established the best record of bomber protection among all escort groups. Their tactical approach should be studied and potentially adopted by other units." In October 1944, a classified meeting was held at Allied Force Headquarters in London. Air Marshal Tedder, who had initially expressed serious reservations about the Negro pilots, now advocated for their expanded deployment. Minutes from that meeting reveal a remarkable shift. The performance of the colored American fighter group has exceeded all expectations. They have demonstrated not only technical proficiency, but exceptional courage and tactical innovation. Their integration into joint operations has proven beneficial to the overall strategic bombing campaign. Lieutenant Colonel Davis was promoted to colonel in December 1944, becoming one of the youngest colonels in the Army Air Forces. In his acceptance speech, preserved in military archives, he said, "This promotion recognizes not just one man, but the achievements of an entire group who were never given the benefit of the doubt. We did not ask for special treatment, only the opportunity to serve our country and be judged on our merits." As 1945 began, the Red Tails continued their exceptional service. On January 27th, they shot down 13 German aircraft while escorting bombers to targets in Germany. A British intelligence officer, Major Jonathan Harrington, wrote in his assessment, "The Negro pilots fly with a determination that seems to derive from their desire to prove themselves. This has translated into an aggressive but disciplined approach to combat that has proven highly effective." The final months of the war in Europe saw the Red Tails continue their impressive performance. By May 1945, when the war in Europe ended, they had flown over 15,000 sorties and lost only 27 pilots in combat, one of the lowest loss rates of any fighter group. They had destroyed or damaged over 400 enemy aircraft. The final assessment from RAF liaison officers, dated May 10, 1945, stated, "The integration of the American Negro Fighter Group into joint operations has been an unqualified success. Initial reservations have proven entirely unfounded. After the war, the achievements of the Red Tails were quickly forgotten by many. The unit was deactivated as the military resumed its segregated practices." Colonel Davis continued his military career, eventually becoming the first Negro general in the United States Air Force. Many of his pilots returned to civilian life, facing the same discrimination they had fought against overseas. The story might have ended there, consigned to obscurity, but for a series of events beginning in 1960, a military historian, Professor Walter Mitchell of Columbia University, began researching the role of Negro units in World War II. His initial findings, published in the Journal of Military History in 1961, highlighted the exceptional record of the Red Tails. Mitchell wrote, "The achievements of the 332nd Fighter Group stand as a powerful refutation of the racial theories that pervaded military thinking before and during the war." Mitchell's research led him to seek out British assessments of the Negro pilots. Through persistent requests, he gained access to previously classified RAF reports and evaluations. What he found was a clear narrative arc: initial skepticism and prejudice giving way to reluctant recognition, and finally, genuine respect. Mitchell's expanded findings were published in 1963 under the title Red Tails, Prejudice and Performance in the Air War. In 1964, a former RAF officer, Group Captain Edward Hamilton, came forward with a remarkable document. It was a personal letter from Air Marshal Tedder to Air Chief Marshal Portal, dated November 1944. In it, Tedder wrote, "I must confess that my initial assessment of the Negro fighter group was entirely wrong. They have proven themselves equal to, and in many cases superior to, any fighter unit under my command. This experience has forced me to reconsider certain assumptions I have long held regarding racial characteristics and capabilities." Hamilton had served as Tedder's aide and had kept the letter after the war. Now, 20 years later, he felt the truth should be known. The letter was authenticated and eventually donated to the Imperial War Museum in London. Its revelation caused a minor sensation in military circles and contributed to a reassessment of the Red Tails' contribution to the Allied victory. In 1966, James Wiley, now a successful attorney in Chicago, began collecting accounts from surviving members of the 332nd. His efforts resulted in a comprehensive oral history of the unit, published in 1968 as We Flew, We Fought, We Won. The book included numerous testimonials from bomber crews, both American and British, who credited the Red Tails with saving their lives. One of the most poignant accounts came from a British Lancaster bomber pilot, squadron leader Thomas Winterbottom. "We had heard rumors about these colored American pilots. Most of us were skeptical, I'm ashamed to say. Then on April 18, 1944, my bomber was hit and losing altitude over enemy territory. 2 Red Tail fighters stayed with us, providing cover until we reached friendly lines. They could have abandoned us, should have, according to doctrine, but they didn't. I never got to thank them in person, but I've lived 40 more years because of their courage." The story of the Red Tails began to gain wider recognition in the late 1960s. In 1969, a television documentary titled The Red Tail Angels brought their achievements to a broader audience. Viewers were astonished to learn of the unit's exceptional combat record and the prejudice they had overcome. Former Wing Commander Spencer, interviewed for the documentary, stated, "My initial reports on these pilots reflected the prevailing attitudes of the time, attitudes I'm now deeply ashamed of. They proved themselves not just equal, but often superior to any pilots I encountered during the war." Also, in 1969, previously classified mission reports were released that revealed another dimension to the story. The Red Tails had not just been fighting against the Germans and prejudice. They had been operating under restrictive rules of engagement that did not apply to white fighter groups. For the first 2 months of their deployment, they had been prohibited from pursuing enemy aircraft beyond visual range of the bomber formations they were protecting. This restriction, not placed on other fighter groups, had limited their effectiveness and potentially endangered their lives. The restriction had been lifted only after Colonel Davis had threatened to take the matter directly to General Eisenhower. The full story of the Red Tails and the British officers who doubted them reveals much about the nature of prejudice and how it can be overcome. Initially, the British skepticism seemed confirmed when the Negro pilots were assessed as technically proficient but untested in combat. The Munich incident appeared to validate preconceived notions about their discipline and reliability. Only when confronted with irrefutable evidence of exceptional performance did these attitudes begin to change. What makes this story particularly compelling is the documentation of this change. From Wing Commander Spencer's initial dismissive reports to his later acknowledgement of error, from Air Marshal Tedder's early reservations to his private admission that he had been entirely wrong, we see how racial attitudes, even when deeply entrenched, could be overcome by demonstrated excellence. For the men of the 332nd, their achievement was twofold. They compiled one of the most impressive combat records of any fighter group in the war, while simultaneously disproving racial theories that had been used to justify discrimination and segregation. Their legacy extends far beyond the tactical victories they achieved in the skies over Europe. They demonstrated that opportunity, not innate characteristics, determines achievement. The final assessment comes from Air Chief Marshal Portal, who had initially opposed the integration of Negro pilots into joint operations. In a 1967 interview, shortly before his death, he reflected, "The American colored pilots taught us all a valuable lesson. They showed that courage, skill, and determination know no color. It was a lesson some of us were slow to learn, but one I have never forgotten." The story of the Red Tails and the British officers who doubted them reminds us that progress often comes not through words, but through actions. In the crucible of combat, prejudice gave way to respect, doubt to admiration. It is a story that deserves to be remembered not just as a footnote in military history, but as a powerful example of how excellence can overcome prejudice, how actions can change minds, and how opportunity can reveal potential that prejudice would deny. Did you enjoy this story? Your support helps us continue producing new documentaries. A like, a comment, or a share makes all the difference. See more historical cases on our channel, and if you're not yet subscribed, join our community. I'll see you in the next episode.